Welcome to Public Enemy Number 1, the Police Whistleblower. This is episode 7, and it will be my final episode of season 1, where I continue to take you through my journey as a police whistleblower in Canada. If you are curious about some of the concepts I've identified in season 1, please stay tuned for the launch of season 2 in the fall of 2023. Season 2, I'll be looking at those individual issues, but taking you into more detail and explaining the current status of Canadian laws when it comes to protecting whistleblowers. If you'd like to observe the hearing on November 22nd, 2023 at Divisional Court in Ontario, you'll need to sign up to my newsletter on my website at police-whistleblower.ca. That's police-whistleblower.ca. I'll be sending out instructions on how to obtain the Zoom details, as it will be a virtual hearing. I didn't know when I started this podcast how many episodes I would have, and I wasn't really sure of the direction I was going to take. But as I got started, it really started to flow quite easily, and in the end, I'll have 7 episodes in season 1. I haven't scripted any of this, so I hope you understand that if there's episodes where I'm speaking very slowly, it's because I'm formulating what I'm about to say as I'm speaking. I also have my website in front of me so I can scroll through decisions and submissions to make sure that I'm saying everything in the proper order. But here we are now in August of 2023 at the final episode of my story. And I've taken you through everything that's happened from 2016 until 2023. And exactly why I am now public enemy number 1 for the Waterloo Regional Police Service. But I do hope you understand that the major reason I'm still in this fight and not willing to give up is because the police service's case against me is still proceeding. This isn't just a matter of me having a case against them and deciding if I want to proceed with it or not. I am literally fighting for my life. I'm fighting for my right to speak and my fundamental freedom of expression. I don't think I'm any different than any other Canadian. If someone came along and told you that you could no longer speak, I'm pretty sure you would fight just like I am to try to maintain that right. So I've been providing you enough detail for you to formulate your own opinion of what's really going on here. I believe in my very core that this is whistleblower retaliation. We just don't see it that often, so it's really hard for people to identify what that is. This is only happening because I have been outspoken about police issues. If I had resigned and kept quiet, this wouldn't be happening. The only reason they've brought their case against me is because people actually listened to the messages I've been delivering. If I had started speaking out in July of 2017 and it fell on deaf ears and nobody really paid attention to what Kelly Donovan had to say, they would not have proceeded against me the way that they have. But now I feel they really have dug a hole that they won't be able to get out of. And I'm more prepared than ever to make an example of their conduct to protect future whistleblowers like me who decide to do what they know is right. So I told you at the end of episode 6 that I was going to take a dive into the legal profession. And that's because I think that's part of the reason why I'm still here having to fight 7 years after my first disclosure to the Police Services Board. As I always do, I'm going to be sharing with you some facts that I find highly disturbing. And my goal is simply for you to hear me out and develop your own opinion. I've been telling you throughout this podcast that I'm self-represented purely because I can't afford to pay a lawyer. And that's not a lie, but it's only really part of the truth. Because you have to understand that at many times throughout this journey, I have reached out to lawyers. I have done cold calling, so to speak, trying to find lawyers that will help me. I've sent dozens and dozens of emails to law firms that I know represent police officers in similar situations to mine. And every single time, I'm denied representation. And this is not because of conflicts of interest. I really can't say for sure why. But I can tell you that I suspect it's because when you go up against a police service, you are dancing with the devil, so to speak. No one ever wants to address the elephant in the room. Police are part of our judicial system. And this is a conflict of interest that nobody seems to ever want to come face to face with and talk about once and for all. Police are participants in the judicial system. They present evidence to court. They cooperate with Crown attorneys to formulate a criminal case against an accused. Anyone who's had to face a police officer in something like family court knows that they are given an extremely high level of deference. They're assumed to be trustworthy right off the bat because of their profession. And some will even show up to a family court proceeding in full uniform, as if the message wasn't being sent clearly enough. It cannot ever be said that a citizen is treated the same as a police officer in any court proceeding. There is an assumed level of trust for the uniformed police officer simply because of their vocation. But don't get me wrong, I have told you that at times throughout the past 7 years, I have consulted with lawyers. There are lawyers that have been willing to help me, although civil litigation and matters of police conduct might not be their expertise, they have helped me. But it's pretty clear to see that if a lawyer has to choose between a police whistleblower who gave up their employment and a police service who has the unlimited purse of the taxpayer, it's pretty clear what side of that argument they want to be on. So from the very beginning, I've done my best to not only represent myself, but effectively and successfully represent myself. And like I've said, this hasn't come easy. I've had to learn all about the rules of civil procedure and the rules of the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. I have to make sure I do everything right because the other lawyer is the quickest to jump on any little slip I may have made. Although it's funny because when I call them out on their slips, it never goes the same way. I would go on record tomorrow and 100% testify to the fact that self-represented litigants are marginalized throughout this process. One thing I find funny, and others have picked up on this as well, is I've been given kudos in court by judges because of how well my material is put together. In the most recent Court of Appeal decision, it was actually written right into the decision that my written materials and oral submissions demonstrated a high level of sophistication. But then that gets held against me when I don't behave like a lawyer who has nothing at stake. It is written in the most recent Court of Appeal decision, again at paragraph 38, that because I accused Justice Bealby of an apprehension of bias, I was expected to withdraw that submission because the Court of Appeal determined that there was no evidentiary basis for the allegation. But this is where I want to really hammer home my point about the discrepancy between what is actually in the public interest and what our judiciary and tribunals determine to be in the public interest. If we look at this one incident where I had alleged that Justice Bealby may have been in a position of bias, the definition itself talks about a reasonable person believing on the face of an issue. And I knew enough to believe that there may be an apprehension of bias. If the CBC printed an article that said that Kelly Donovan shared the Zoom link with her followers and she doesn't regret it at all, and then the actual regional chief justice himself writes a publication ban citing that one of the litigants shared the information on their social media, that's a clear nexus between him having read the CBC article and issuing the publication ban. Now, is it realistic that Justice Bealby may have read the CBC article and read the Regional Chief Justice's publication ban and still issued his ruling from a completely objective and impartial position? Absolutely, that is still a possibility. But I don't think it was wrong for me to allege that the opposite might be true. He may have been inclined to rule against me, which means that I was not treated fairly in that process. But for me to simply bring that to their attention as a possibility did not, in my opinion, reach a level where I was committing some kind of egregious act against the institution of justice. But this is why I've chosen to do an entire episode all about the legal profession. The Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms ensures that every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to the equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination. Despite this, I have been told several times that had I been represented by a lawyer throughout this ordeal, I would have been heard and my arguments would have gained traction. What does that say about access to justice in Canada? Do Canadians have access to justice? Or is it only Canadians that can afford a lawyer? I may not have presented the absolute best arguments I could have in every scenario as I've gone along this journey, but I challenge any of my listeners to read through my legal submissions and tell me where I completely dropped the ball. At each step along this process, I think the major failures in my journey have been when I didn't feel as if I was heard. And this has primarily been when I have presented myself before a male judge. And when I came into this, don't get me wrong, I never intended to make this fight about my gender. But it didn't take long for me to realize that the female judges were the ones that were taking the time to actually listen to me. I really got the impression when I spoke in front of male judges that they already had their opinion developed about me before I even opened my mouth. And this is a real problem that I do honestly believe needs to be looked at by government. I'd love to know if any researchers out there have done a study, spoken with female lawyers. Maybe they've had the same experience that I've had. If they haven't, then this narrows the focus to say that self-represented litigants are marginalized and that it may not have anything to do with gender. Either way, I have experienced differential treatment, and this should not happen in a judicial system that prides itself on not discriminating against litigants. But that wasn't the direction I wanted to take for episode 7. The reason I wanted to take a deep dive into the legal profession is because what I've experienced firsthand does not shed a positive light on the legal profession. So here's what I want you to know. You already know everything that I've been through. I continuously tell you how much the police service has spent on their legal representation in these matters. But let's go back to where this all began. The police service does have its own lawyer. They have a director of legal services that is a full-time employee of the police service. But back in 2016, when I first filed my initial human rights complaint against the police service after they retaliated against me for speaking to the board, they hired outside counsel to defend them against my application. When it came time for me to negotiate my resignation, it was this same lawyer that the police service hired to write the resignation agreement. I don't even need to name him because there's enough published decisions that you can look them up and see for yourself. But repeated communication between the police service and my lawyer referenced this particular lawyer and how he was going to be drawing up the contract. And he's also the lawyer that left me the voicemail on June 6th, 2017, that said the police service is not trying to restrict Constable Donovan from speaking out or saying what she wants. Now, fast forward 7 months. This is the same lawyer that prepared the appeal of my WSIB claim. Surely he knew that there was a term in the contract that prevented the Waterloo Regional Police Service from filing any appeals against me, but that didn't prevent his conduct in January of 2018. Likewise, it was the same lawyer that filed the application at the Human Rights Tribunal against me, alleging that when I speak out or say what I want, I'm somehow violating the agreement. And he's still the same lawyer representing them today in my allegations against them and their allegations against me. Am I the only one that sees a problem with this? I know the Court of Appeal seemed to think that I don't know what it's like to be a lawyer, and that's why I just flagrantly made that allegation against Justice Bealby. But, even as a layperson, I can stand back and see that at some point in time, this lawyer should have recused himself and advised the Waterloo Regional Police Service to obtain a new lawyer to get an independent opinion of the situation. This reminds me of the saying, if you can't see the forest for the trees, you could be too closely involved. And I have brought this to their attention, but it hasn't changed the trajectory of the litigation. So as much as I've been scolded throughout this process, how dare you make this allegation of us? I do really want to know, when is warranted criticism acceptable? Because when you're talking about a public institution that is litigating on the public dime, I think every one of these questions needs to be answered. I've been saying since the very beginning that public institutions are never above reproach, and when criticized, their conduct should withstand criticism. Only when it doesn't do we know that we have a problem on our hands and that problem needs to be rectified. But the problem in Canada is that we will continue to shoot the messenger. We don't have whistleblower protections in Canada. The laws we do have are so incredibly narrow and have been proven to be ineffective. Even when a whistleblower exposed interference by our Prime Minister, it was the whistleblower that was dismissed. But like me, I know that Jody Wilson-Raybould was also highly underestimated by Justin Trudeau, and I know we haven't seen the last of her. So this reminds me of my point of doing this podcast from the very beginning. It's that there may have been a time that people were effectively scared into remaining silent about something they knew was wrong. But I do feel the tides shifting. I do think people are starting to recognize that only in speaking out can they regain their power. Attempts to silence whistleblowers are being thwarted. People are starting to learn all about whistleblower retaliation, and they're starting to recognize the value of whistleblowers. I know that people who spoke out even 10 or 20 years ago are looking at us today and seeing how far we've come. Even in the short 7 years since I began this journey, I'm seeing people today speak out and get such a better reception from the public than I did 7 years ago. I think if I had done my delegation to the board today, as opposed to 2016, I may have been able to stay employed as a police constable and try to affect change from the inside. That's how much progress has been made in just a short 7 years. So I am optimistic. I may be getting tired and I'm ready to hand off the torch to someone else, but I am still optimistic that we're headed in the right direction. I haven't mentioned as we've gone along through this podcast that I've now self-published 2 books. The first book I published was my initial 93-page report, The Systemic Misfeasance in Ontario Policing and the Coordinated Suppression of Whistleblowers. The irony of it today really makes me laugh. I mean, what else can I do? But honestly, I wrote a book in 2017 about how all of these systems coordinate their efforts to silence a whistleblower. And it's almost like I wrote the playbook for Waterloo Regional Police. Here I am 6 years later, and there has been a coordinated effort to try to achieve my silence. My second self-published book is all about my journey, and I call it Police Line Do Not Cross: Silencing a Canadian Police Whistleblower. I initially released the book in 2020, but I updated it in a 3rd edition in November of 2022. Both of my books are available for purchase on my website, policeversuswhistleblower.ca, and there is a lot more detail in the books than what I've provided you in the podcast. And since nothing today is free, I will tell you that the sponsor of this podcast is my corporation, Fit for Duty, the Ethical Standard. I told you that when I left policing, I started my own corporation to provide independent and impartial whistleblower program administration. That's what I'm doing with Fit for Duty. And I called it Fit for Duty because it's a term that is widely used to say that somebody is fit for duty. But to be fit for duty, they just have to be physically fit and healthy to do the job. But I took a different spin. I said that if you're not ethically fit for duty, if you're not meeting the ethical standard, then should you really be described as being fit for duty? So I use the term fit for duty to mean the ethical standard, and that's what I endeavored to achieve with my corporation. I truly believe that any corporation that values accountability and transparency must leave their whistleblower program to an independent third party. It's the only way to eliminate the risk that any internal bias will affect the handling of complaints. For more information, please visit fitforduty.ca. That's FIT, the number 4, DUTY.ca. Thank you very much for coming on this journey with me. And if you care to stick around for Season 2, I do intend to create a series of podcast episodes that will dig deeper into the issues identified in Season 1. This is the podcast your local police leaders don't want you listening to. But trust me when I say that you'll be better off for having listened. Don't forget to sign up for my newsletter at policeversuswhistleblower.ca, and you'll get emails from me leading up to the November 22nd hearing about how you can observe through Zoom. In closing, I know that we're currently in a time where society is highly divided on so many issues, but I know that within this podcast I've identified something that we all can get behind, and that's how much we value the truth. We all expect that our government will deliver nothing but the truth, and we all expect transparency and accountability around how our public dollars are being spent. So please continue to share and rate my podcast in the interest of truth and government transparency. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for Season 2 coming in the fall of 2023. Take care.